Hello team, how's it going? Welcome to a new video where we are checking out Chinese troops deployed to Poland's border. With everything that's going on in the world, this could be quite interesting to see what's actually going on and how this can progress. But as always, check out the original video in the description and let's get into it.
In July 2024, China transported soldiers 3,000 miles away into Belarus. They conducted joint training exercises only 1.5 miles away from NATO member Poland's border and 40 miles away from the border with Ukraine.
China's joint military exercises with Russia and Belarus coming just days after NATO's strongest denunciation of Beijing.
Does this mean it's time to sound the alarmist alarm? The Chinese are coming! The Chinese are coming!
The reason this has made world news headlines is because of the implication. Beijing hasn't done a mission like this since 2015. So the timing of the drill indicates that the CCP is sending a warning message to the United States that they're prepared to deploy troops to fight against NATO in Europe. Keep in mind, the United States military routinely conducts much larger training missions near the border of China and Russia. Russia has also recently ran a submarine mission to their allies in Cuba, right near the United States. But I think the reason this otherwise routine mission can shock people today is because of the rhetoric that we hear around it. The deputy head of the General Staff of the Belarusian Armed Forces said that the maneuvers were in response to the West's aggressive foreign policy towards Belarus and to Ukrainian provocation. Meanwhile, NATO recently met in Washington, D.C., where they released a joint statement calling China a decisive enabler of Russia's war, and that China is currently engaged in enabling the largest land war in Europe in recent history. Beijing responded saying the accusations were lies and smears, and said that the exercises weren't aimed at any single country. This sounds like the geopolitical version of high school gossip, but it begs the question, could China actually fight a land war in Europe? How many troops could the CCP deploy and sustain that far away from their border? To answer that, we need to take a look at 3 key areas of the China.
So yeah, before we just get into that, obviously this is pretty big news, but as you just saw there, yes, China have moved troops close to Poland's border and not too far from the Ukrainian border, but the US are constantly doing it. They've got bases all around the world, so they can easily transport troops and supplies in and around the world. If anything does kick off, they've got a base nearby. That's why they do it. They've got an operating base they can sort of send fighter jets out of. They can get supplies in and out of. They can get troops in and out of. Once again, they're also regularly conducting naval and sort of army and marine exercises in and around the Chinese border. Obviously, in and around the sea there. In Japan, they work closely with the UK, work very closely with Japan recently. And then obviously you've got all the stuff that's going on with Taiwan. So I think the US are having a presence there to sort of hopefully prevent anything happening in Taiwan. So all it's doing, sort of similar to the US, and it just looks like China, you could look at it in 2 ways. It's sort of a sign of aggression, or it could just be a sign of China's working closely with its allies and it's conducting a routine exercise so they can learn how to work together and more closely so they understand everyone's SOPs, just like we do with NATO and the US, etc, etc. So there's a couple of ways you can look at it, but obviously people are going to get slightly terrified with everything that's going on. China possibly backing Russia, the Russia-Ukrainian war, Belarus, and other stuff that's going on in the world. It makes, because tensions are high, it makes people panic and sort of think, is this going on when it could technically just be a routine exercise, just so they can learn how to work together.
Chinese military, strategic airlift, sea and ground transportation. We'll start with strategic airlift. China sent one single Y-20 cargo plane to Belarus. For context, that's slightly smaller than the American C-17 transport, so we can actually assume that it can carry a similar amount of 188 soldiers. No tanks or armor were sent on the training exercise. According to China's Ministry of National Defense, they conducted a, quote, anti-terror training mission that included things like hostage rescue, urban combat, and water crossings. Not sure what type of terror group you're fighting where you need to train on contested river crossings, but okay, fair enough. The Y-20 has a payload capacity of 66 tons, so it can potentially carry 2 light tanks or 1 main battle tank. Since 2016, you probably haven't heard of this, but China has quietly built a fleet of 67 Y-20s. This has gotten exactly 0 attention though, because they don't do sexy things like fighters that fire off missiles. But in many ways, their strategic implication is much bigger.
Because of the implication.
China is now one of only 4 nations in the entire world to manufacture a 200-ton military transport jet. If you want to project power and fight wars abroad, acquiring this asset is the first step.
That is pretty massive, to basically be able to build your own transport planes, and the fact that they've built 67 just shows how much they can sort of, or are willing or looking to transport. 67, possibly just under 200 personnel in each one, tanks, and possibly they're going to build more. Why do they need 67 for? Because they want to get troops in and around just in case. So they are preparing for something by the looks of it.
Actually, isn't the first time we've seen them in Europe. In April of 2022, military observers were surprised to see 6 of these Chinese Y-20s land in Nikola Tesla International Airport inside Serbia. According to the Serbian president, Beijing delivered unto him FK-3 surface-to-air missiles. These are the export variant of China's HQ-22 SAM. It's kind of like the Russian S-300. The point is, China isn't focusing their airlift to deploy troops. So far, they're mainly using it to transport weapons and equipment. China has 20 of the similar Russian-produced IL-76 cargo planes that can carry 2 lightweight armored trucks, no tanks, and 130 troops. What all that means is that with their current capabilities, China could fly 12,000 soldiers to Russia or Belarus if they absolutely needed to. That's roughly 2 brigades, but this doesn't include armored vehicles. A typical armored brigade has at least 80 main battle tanks, 18 self-propelled artillery vehicles, 150 infantry fighting vehicles, and 100 armored trucks and logistic vehicles. So, it would take China's entire strategic airlift fleet 10 round trips to deploy 2 brigades. Moving that many troops and equipment with those assets would take over a month. But I might be being far too generous with those estimates, because I spoke with an active duty US Army officer who works in logistics in strategic airlift, and he said, quote, "Assuming all 67 Y-20s are available and fully mission capable, the PLA could airlift 8,978 soldiers in one go. While this is a lot of light infantry, it brings up a lot more questions. Where are they going to land? Every airbase and airport has a limited amount of aircraft they can realistically store, service, and maintain. This number is known as the maximum on ground and is typically measured from the aircraft's wingtips and added amount of length on each side in order to allow for the bird to maneuver on the ground. And where are all these 9,000 soldiers going to eat, sleep, and shit? Adding all 9,000 soldiers will immediately jump the local population by an emotionally significant amount. In order for this to work, the PLA will have to painstakingly negotiate an agreement with Belarus. Another logistics soldier I spoke to said, quote, "The heavier you load an aircraft with cargo, the more wear and tear occurs. So you often have to trade off range for cargo capacity. Some aircraft may have to be tasked to support and recover aircraft with maintenance issues, to fly both specialists and parts to fix non-mission capable aircraft." So what he's saying is that not all those 67 Y-20s can be dedicated to just flying combat power there. You also need to dedicate some of them to support roles. But we're forgetting about a whole nother major problem before we even get there. Mid-air refueling. When fully loaded, China's Y-20 has a max range that's reduced down from 7,000 kilometers to 3,700 kilometers. The closest point from Belarus to China is the capital in Xinjiang, which is 4,600 kilometers. These numbers come straight from the Chinese media publications themselves, who spoke to Zhu Chan, who's the head of their aviation industry corporation. The article claims fully loaded Y-20s would be restricted to domestic operations in China. This is why they would need mid-air refueling for many of these missions. But there's another problem. Currently, China doesn't have any major mid-air refueling capabilities like the 400 refueler tankers that America currently has. They just started manufacturing versions of the Y-20, the U variant, for refueling. China also doesn't have any of the giant American C-5 or Russian AN-124 cargo aircraft, which can carry twice the capacity at 140 tons, so they can carry 2 tanks instead of 1. What all of this means is that China's current airlift capacity would struggle to support a limited war in Europe.
Yeah, so it's making it look like it's a logistical nightmare. It looks like they would really struggle to support any sort of war within Europe. But what you could look at is, could they not use some of the Russian equipment? Could they not land in Russia first, refuel, move on? Okay, it's going to slow the process down. Could you not, on your way to Belarus, take over some sort of base within Russia, have supplies left there so you're not coming all the way back to China. There's other ways that you can look at it. Your first initial assault in would be a nightmare, but if you allow them to do that and then build up sort of closer barracks and bases within Russia and possibly other areas like Serbia, then it could possibly strengthen them. It's that first initial assault I think is the hardest, but I think if you start seeing them moving to Russia more regularly, then you might have to worry.
The assessment is backed up by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which was created by the United States Congress to research the Chinese military. Among other things, they state that in their report on China's power projection, quote, in the medium term, next 10 to 15 years or so by like 2035, the People's Liberation Army aims to be capable of fighting a limited war overseas to protect its interests in countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. By mid-century, though, the PLA aims to be capable of rapidly deploying forces anywhere in the world. Roger Cliff wrote a great publication titled China's Future Military Capabilities for the U.S. Army War College. In it, he stated, China's Air Force does not currently appear to be aiming to become a global power projection force. The acquisition of aerial refueling aircraft appears to be a lesser priority. The PLA Air Force does not yet possess heavy bombers, and the acquisition of airlift aircraft appears to be intended primarily to support the wartime requirements of air transportation as opposed to expeditionary air operations. What all of that means is that when we look at their airlift capabilities, they're entirely designed and focused on supporting a war against Taiwan or their near abroad. But just because strategic airlift isn't quite ready for Beijing, what other options might they have at their disposal? Let's take a look at ground transportation. The PLA could use the Trans-Siberian Railway. They would have to first load tanks and troops onto ships, then offload them at Vladivostok, before moving them by rail about 9,300 kilometers across Russia. And there's another overland option as well. This is the Chongqing-Xinjiang European Railway. I think I said that correctly. God bless me. It takes about 16 days to travel the roughly 11,000 kilometers from China to Belarus through this route. If China needed to deploy troops into Europe, this is another potential overland route. However, it's already used by 30 trains each day for trade and economic activity from China into Europe, so it would have to be some kind of cataclysmic, world-ending emergency event to see the potential militarization of these routes. The railway infrastructure is designed for cargo, not troop movements. There's also a lot of weight limitations on these tracks, and it would require some significant modifications to freight cars to pull off sending tanks and equipment, military variety through there.
But there's three options. You could do the initial assault using the Y-60s. You could fly them in. You've then got two possible overland routes where you can send food, logistical supplies, equipment parts, weapon systems, ammunition, if you really wanted to. So it is possible. Like I said, if you start building up supply chains and drops within Russia, Serbia, Belarus, slowly building them up, then you get that initial assault in. You've got places closer to you, like the US do, like the UK do, with Cyprus, Akrotiri, Germany. That's why we had them, because we had a little bit of a stronghold closer inland if we needed it.
China would also need to coordinate and get permission from Kazakhstan, where their rail passes through. So there's also geopolitical concerns here. But it wouldn't be insurmountable because Kazakhstan and Russia and China are all founding members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is actually the group that Belarus just joined. So it's a big reason why these training exercises are happening in the first place. The active duty U.S. Army logistics officer that I spoke to had this to say about the railway route. This would allow the PLA to deploy more soldiers, more supplies, and even heavier equipment. This could work for a short training deployment, but would be wholly inadequate during a longer deployment, and even worse during combat operations. The extreme distance between mainland China and Belarus would force the PLA to rely on a predictive style of resupply, push method, and not a responsive style, pull method. This would either overburden units with more rations, ammunition, and repair parts than they can consume, or, more likely, not enough. We already know in 2021, China sent troops, tanks, and equipment through rail into Russia. They were there to participate in the International Army Games, kind of like the Olympics but for war. But they didn't go very far. They just traveled right across the border in the Mongolia Autonomous Region. There'd be all kinds of red tape and problems with trying to militarize a trade route, a railway like that. So what if China tried to go over sea instead? When it comes to China's sea lift capabilities, they have 3 Type 75 transport ships that can move 800 soldiers and 2 operational aircraft carriers. But there isn't really a route that they could take to Europe, because going east to the Bering Strait through there wouldn't really work since the Arctic Ocean isn't navigable most of the year. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely Turkey would allow China to transport troops through the Bosphorus River that they control. The CCP currently doesn't have a blue water navy or the foreign relationships necessary to transport soldiers that far away. But supporting soldiers abroad is about much more than just getting them there. You have to be able to send spare parts for when the vehicles break down. You got to be able to send fuel, tools, food, and ammunition thousands of miles away too. Loading and unloading, sending all of this is called railhead operations. The railhead operations are dangerous, time-consuming, and an all-around nightmare. Conducting them requires an enormous amount of training, skill, and specific transportation equipment. It's nothing like riding a bike. Once you do it, you need to continue to do it and train on it to be able to do it correctly. Even with practicing these things all the time. Between 2006 and 2018, 31% of active duty US military deaths were results of accidents on things like these kind of transportation operations. It would take 2 months at least to move a similar size 2 brigades this method, especially without any of the infrastructure or training ahead of time. But China will continue to grow their power projection abilities. In 2016, Zhu Qin of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China stated that they needed more than 1,000 of the Y-20s, and it's likely China will have 100 of them by 2032. In order to match the United States airlift capabilities, though, they would need well over 230 of them and another 100 refuelers. The assessment of China reaching these capabilities by 2035 or 2040 seems to be on track with the rate at which the CCP is producing transport aircraft. But I'm curious to know what you think of my assessment. Was there a transportation route or outside-the-box method that you can think of that I missed? Do I have my head really far up my ass? And be sure to check out one of these videos before you go.
I think if there ever was a case for it to happen, it's got to be slowly without us even noticing. Yeah, they're on track to build 1,000 Y-20s, 100 refueling, but that's going to take a long time to get there. A very long time. We're still a long way off that. And the US are only ever increasing their capabilities, and NATO are only ever increasing their capabilities. So it'd be a case of dropping off supplies and ammunition along the way over the next couple of years, so you have these sort of depots, so it's ready to go for when you do that a big assault, or you have a way of securing the railway and all the land from China up to around Belarus, making sure that is secure. So when you have that initial assault, you've got the stronghold positions, so you can quickly get resupplying again over the next 3 to 6 months. What is more surprising, which I don't think people actually realise, is how far behind the military capability of China is to America. As we know, China, along with India, got the largest population in the world, around 1.3, 1.4 billion people. Land mass is just ridiculous what they have. They do have a large military sort of population. They have a lot of military personnel, but they don't actually have the same sort of equipment and numbers compared to the US. So they are falling behind, especially when it comes to the Navy and the Air Force. And the US Navy is just well above anyone else's. So, like I said, the US always constantly looking to increase their military defense budget is 800 billion a year. No one even comes close to that. So for China to catch up, it's going to take a lot. And after watching this video, there's all this big worry of, possibly World War III kicking off, China, Russia, Belarus. But, it could kick off if someone's stupid enough. But really, do they have the kit, equipment, military personnel to back it up and support it? Do they have the supply chains? Most probably not. Not unless you can secure them in Russia already, start dropping off bits of equipment, build aircraft, tanks, equipment faster, which I just don't think they can. They can build quickly, China, but I don't think they can build them that quickly, and make sure that that's secure and they're all serviced at the same time. Once you've got that issue, once it flies a route, you send all 100 and guarantee you 5-10% of them break and they're going to need repairing straight away. Once again, when they're fully loaded, like he said, you could range drops by about half, so that's a massive issue as well. So I think them deploying into Poland's border, just a routine exercise. Yeah, we dropped 188 troops or whatever into Belarus. We conducted an exercise. Yeah, it's capable. We can move troops that far, but can we do it en masse? If we start seeing them do exercises en masse, 2 or 3 airdrops of personnel along with vehicles, tanks, then maybe. But just to say, yeah, we've dropped off, yeah, okay, that's quite obvious. You can fly roughly 200 personnel to close to Poland's border. But I think for it's become bigger news. We need some sort of mass exercise. Maybe they're moving along railway with aircraft. But very, very good video by Task and Purpose. Really good breakdown, really informative, great information. So thanks for that. I thoroughly enjoyed that video, and thanks for watching.